Good morning. Good morning. It's a beautiful morning here. It rained here overnight. We've needed rain for a long time. It's probably too late for us here, but it's still quite a thing to wake up in the middle of the night with thunder and lightning and rain pouring outside. It's a wonderful thing. So I'm really grateful to God this morning. I'm noticing a number of you are commenting, but it's not coming through on my usual feeds. So I'm just going to have to. I can't bring you on screen, but I want to say good morning to Jennifer from Nebraska, and Artist BC from Indiana, and Ben from North Texas. God bless you guys. And other people sign on, let us know where you're from. Even if I can't see you and bring you on screen, people on whatever platform you're on can see you. So right now I'm on YouTube, Facebook, X, Rumble, and Local. So between those five, hopefully there's an increasing audience of people who are interested in reclaiming the Christian faith and the Wesleyan tradition. I'm a global Methodist elder who cares about these things. I think that, especially in America, but also throughout the world, in large part, the strength of Christianity has been lost, and it's not because God has abandoned us or He's not faithful. It's because we've tried to replace the true Christian faith with a counterfeit, and it's not very compelling. And the world is falling apart, and the world needs true believers. And so I would just rather spend my life being a part of that than pretending like what we've got here is the fullness of what God promised or expects. So hopefully you at least sympathize with that. I realize a lot of people are going to be in a lot of different places on this, but as I look at the world today and the church today, I'm eminently, profoundly disappointed, and that's a sentiment I've had since I was young. I, as a youth growing up in the United Methodist Church, I knew that what is not what should be. And I had an older family member I was talking to about that who had given his life to the church. And he said, Jeffrey, I'm just so profoundly disappointed in you for thinking that. And it became clear to me early on in life that holding who we are and what we're doing up against the Bible is a controversial thing to do. It's something that's not welcome for a lot of people. And for that reason, there is a lot of pushback. And it's not like I'm the only one saying this stuff. But people who do say this stuff, they get hammered down because if they expose that what we're doing is not what we should be doing, then that demands a response that a lot of people don't want to offer. So thinking of G.K. Chesterton, it is not, man, I always butcher this. He says it is not that the Christian faith has been tried and found wanting. It's that the Christian faith has been rarely tried and found very difficult. And because we are lazy and self-justifying, we do not do as we know we ought. And I don't know. When you have pastors and preachers and elders and you're asking them to be complicit in that, that's just wrong. So I'm not going to be complicit in that. I'm going to hold the standard of Christ up high, even though I myself don't even meet it. I am yearning for a future community, a beloved community where we are striving to meet the standards of Christ together. And I hope you hunger for that as well. I spent my morning this morning worshiping with a small crew of people who support my ministry. We worship together 4 mornings a week, and we prayed for the people we love who stand outside of the covenant community of Christ, who are lost. And man, my heart was just really pricked. We have the most beautiful thing on earth, and it's the only thing that can save people from their sins. And it's on the defense, and it's on the retreat, and that's not as it should be. Christ has bound the strong man so that we can go in and pillage his house. And by God, we need to pillage. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, read your Bible. I'm going to acknowledge a few more people, and then I found a prayer from Guigo the Carthusian this morning. I've never heard of him, but it was a good prayer. Want to say good morning to my sister Dee, and Brad from Tennessee, and JP from Tulsa, and Howard, and Lon from New Braunfels, Texas. And thank you for your amen, JP. Here's an interesting prayer from Guigo the Carthusian of the 12th century. Lord, how much juice can you squeeze from a single grape? How much water can you draw from a single well? How much fire can you kindle from a tiny spark? How great a tree can you grow from a tiny seed? My soul is so dry that by itself it cannot pray. Yet you squeeze from it the juice of 1,000 prayers. My soul is so parched that by itself it cannot love. Yet you can draw from it boundless love for you and for my neighbor. My soul is so cold that by itself it has no joy. Yet you can light the fire of heavenly joy within me. My soul is so feeble that by itself it has no faith. Yet by your power my faith grows to a great height. Thank you for prayer, for love, for joy, for faith. Let me always be prayerful, loving, joyful, faithful. Amen. Today's All Hallows Eve, otherwise to the world known as Halloween. This is one of many holidays in our culture that was rooted in something of the Christian faith and then bastardized and separated from it. What do we do? How do we live in response to it? A lot of Christians think our job is just to come alongside the culture, observe the holiday as it is in what ways we can. This is seen in a lot of churches by the tradition of trunk or treat. You know, we're going to provide a safe environment where we hand out candy, maybe some gospel tracts, and we all dress up in ways that aren't too grotesque. I don't know that that's the Christian witness. You know, I am of the mind, I'm one of these extremists, you know, that as the world has tried to take Christmas and Halloween and Easter from us, that the answer is not to, you know, have Santa and the Easter bunny and all these pagan things that they've imposed on our Christian holiday. I am of the mind that we should take it back and that we should do things as they were done in the beginning and that we should renounce the world and its ways because there is no salvation in it. So, for years, you know, I read a book several years ago on the history of Halloween, All Hallows Eve, All Souls, All Saints. It was a 3-day season where kind of the notion was that at this time of year, the dividing line between this realm and the realm of the dead, that dividing line kind of got thinned. There were thin places where those of us who were alive, we could feel a little bit more the presence of those who had departed. And so this was a natural time for us to reflect on our mortality and the reality of death and the reality of the resurrection as well in the Christian faith. And I want us to reclaim this 3-day holiday again. I think that the Christian church is uniquely positioned in the West to help people sober up and live their lives in light of their death. We are hiding death more than any culture has ever been able to. We hide the old and aging and dying in nursing homes, and we burn our dead so that we can't even see their bodies. We so dress up bodies that they don't. We are scared to death of death. We don't even think about it. Even people in the church are so scared of death that they don't even think about it. They see that as some kind of defeatist thing. Scriptures, meanwhile, are very much concerned with how do we live our lives today in light of the fact that we will die, you know, and as Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, the call of Christ is essentially follow me and die. And so death is at, we're not a death cult as I talked about last week, but death is at the center of the Christian witness because we believe that Christ conquered death. And so what to the world looks like defeat is actually a victory for those of us who live and die in Christ. And so I think that the Christian church is uniquely positioned in the West which is avoiding death, which avoids even getting old, which is scared to death of even getting sick. You know, it has a complex, you know, a neurosis. It's got a very unhealthy aversion to these things. The church needs to lean right into it and not fetishize it. I mean, that's the thing about Halloween. Halloween is a response to this very messed up mentality that the West has, where they don't think about it, don't think about it, don't think about it, and then they fetishize it for one day. And you have all these grotesque displays of skeletons and the overlapping of sexual licentiousness and death in Halloween. I went to undergrad like everybody else. I saw it and I didn't know how depraved it was because it's what the culture does. But what the Christian witness should be doing is in those 3 days pointing people towards Christ in light of our inevitable death. And we honor those who have gone before, but we also point towards a Savior. And so that's what ever since I learned about the early history of this time of year and the Christian holiday of All Hallows Eve and All Souls and All Saints, I can't help but want it back. I just feel like what we've got today in so many ways is a cheap replica of something that was once so rich and powerful. And I can't help but want the real thing, Like when you have margarine's bad for you, by the way. I don't know if you know this. Eleanor Roosevelt got on TV and plugged it in her like she was very unhealthy. For some reason, they thought she was like a model of health and they could take advice from her. Margarine is just plastic. That's all it is. We're not meant to process it. It's terrible for us. If you have margarine and then you have butter is so much better. And it has so much more of a punch. It's so good. And what you've got in the Christian faith where it began is real butter. And what a lot of churches and the culture is selling today is margarine. And not only does it not taste as good, but it's killing you. And so don't do it. Return. I want to say good morning to Mike Kersey from Western New York. JP says, I have class for seminary tonight. I was going to be singing a hymn and such tonight as we handed out candy and was going to try and talk about some of the saints who have gone before us with some friends. It's a worthy effort. The Methodist in Wesley's time would go to dying saints and record the accounts of their lives using the witness of their final moments of many singing hymns and their last breath. Thanks to God. Once upon a time, Methodist obituaries were quite a thing to behold. And you're absolutely right. Nowadays here's when they died, here's who they were related to who already died, here's who they're related to who's still alive. But man, once upon a time this was a man who lived and died for the Lord. Here are the things that he did. Here are his dying words. Here are the final blessings he uttered. It should be so again. Toy says, that's a good point. Ignore death, then fetishize it for a day. Yeah. Aaron says, today is also Reformation Day. And that's absolutely the case. And that's something worth focusing on. What I was thinking about this morning was the crisis that we're in at this point of history. And I will get into actual topics today. This is an actual topic. I'm gonna treat this seriously. We ever since the Protestant Reformation, maybe you could see iterations of this before, but have had an authority crisis. And that's essentially what the Reformation was. The authority of the Roman Catholic Church had been abused, could not be redeemed, had to be abandoned. That's what the Protestant Reformation was all about. The Roman Catholic Church was too far gone. Now, they were kind of partly wrong because it did spurn a reformation within the Roman Catholic Church that had some good things to it. In my opinion, they didn't do good enough, but that's besides the point. What's happened ever since the Reformation is, especially since the invention of the printing press, you had official authorities that would decide what was true and what was false and what all people should do and not do. And that got interrupted by alternate institutions coming up and by an appeal to the individual conscience. And ever since then, there have been more and more iterations of this, such that there's been kind of a splintering, even as a global monoculture has arisen. It's a very strange, very interesting thing. In many ways, in the religious landscape, and in many other ways, there's been splintering, more and more groups, more and more denominations, more and more covenant bodies. And there's also been the elevation of the self and non-denominational churches and independent churches. There are a lot of people who at this point believe that you can follow Jesus not even being a part of the church, just staying home and not even reading your Bible, just praying, And I think that way lies damnation, in case I'm not clear about that usually. But we are at a point in history where we're realizing all of the institutions that we built up 100 years ago have been compromised. There's been ideological drift. Science is in crisis. The media is in crisis. Higher education's in crisis, and all for good reason. They've betrayed the trust given them. What on earth can be done? There are a lot of people who say, well, then you just have to appeal to the individual. All you can have is a small town local government, and anything beyond that's going to be corrupted. And that sounds awful to me. I think the place that we're at right now, it can't be intimidated by the fact that we don't have any trusted institutions. Rather, we have to build new trusted institutions. So when the ACLU fails, you have to build FIRE. And I forget what that acronym even stands for, but these are the people carrying the banner of free speech now. Whenever higher education fails, you got to get the University of Austin, which of course is Barry Weiss's new outfit. And then whenever the United Methodist Church fails, you got the Global Methodist Church. And that needs to be a source of true authority and integrity, and we need to maintain and protect that along the way. The situation our culture is in right now is that you have trusted institutions which have been compromised, and then you got crazy Looney Tunes that are conspiracy theorists. And then you got other people that you're not sure if they're loony or not. Maybe I'm one of the loonies. But the desire on the part of the average person is, look, just tell me what to believe, just tell me what to do, and I'll do it, but don't make me think about it. And I think for those of us who are made in God's image and we come to terms with it, we have to use our brains. We have to use our critical thought. We have to meditate and reflect upon things. And if our default is, I'm a Republican, I've always been a Republican, that's all I'm going to do, whatever their platform is, that's what I've got, don't make me think about it. I'm a Democrat, I've always been a Democrat, I'm a blue dog Democrat, don't make me think about it, don't make me question it. I was listening to an interview with RFK Jr. yesterday. Man, and Democrats hate him because he's, his family is Democrats going back to when they showed up during the potato famine in the mid-19th century in Boston, right? And his whole family is part of this Democrat machine, but he says they have inverted so much of what the Democratic Party used to be about. It's not the same party anymore. And the exact same thing happened in the United Methodist Church. So many people, they're in United Methodist till I die, they can't see that the institution changed and that it stands against the things that it used to stand for. We have to be able to see with eyes unclouded things as they are. And we have to be able to respond accordingly. Sometimes there are things that we can cling to still. And then other times things get too far gone that we have to abandon those things and cling to something else. And there are some things that we can't let go, like marriage. That's a indissoluble union, except in the case of adultery, maybe, probably. That's what Jesus says. But there are other things, like membership in a local church that's apostatized, that you have to have the strength to leave, even if it means that you give up on a building and these assets and projects that you've built up. It's a very scary thing to do, but, we're called to be alive. To be truly alive, not just enslaved to the different institutions that have marked different chapters of our lives. When you have a proper love of the Lord, then you realize that all these other things can change. Now, that's not to say you can abandon all these things and just be a sage off in the woods, but that is to say that our voluntary associations can and should change based on our values and beliefs and theirs. And so we have to have the strength and integrity to listen rather than, this doesn't conform with my preconceived notions of how the world works. You have to be open to the Reformation. The Reformation was needed. This is coming back to where we started today's Reformation Day. You have to be open to the possibility that we're doing things wrong and we need to reclaim something that was lost. That's what the Reformation was. It wasn't, we're going to do something new because the old stinks and it doesn't work anymore. Rather, the notion was the Roman Catholics so distorted the Christian faith. We need to get back to its roots. We need to go back to where we started. We need to go back to Pentecost. So there's this call to return from the Reformation. And what do you know? That's what we saw in Methodism as well, a reclaiming of the form and power of righteousness as seen in the scriptures that point us to that beginning of the church. It's only in recent years that we created this new religion that worships the new and hates the old. And we don't want to go back. We want to invent something new. We want to hold on to a few things of the past, but God is doing a new thing. Can you feel it? The new thing God did was in Christ. No new thing is needed after that. And so there are those of us who want to return and get back to the things that actually have power, the real butter, the quality butter, forsaking the margarine of this present age, pursuing the purity of where we started off. That's what the true church is about. That's what true Christians are about. And that's the presence we're supposed to have in the world. It's not supposed to be phoning it in, surface level, shallow, callow. We're supposed to be deep people of integrity and meaning. And now's the day for that. So, as we're talking about reclaiming true Christian traditions, as we're talking about the Reformation and the effort to do just that, I hope everybody is convicted. I'm feeling convicted right now. And I think I'm ready to stop preaching at you. So I'll look at comments one more time, and then we'll look at a couple news stories for today. We got Brian from Tisdale, Kansas. Jared Neal, good to see you, brother. Brian Doyle, Aaron Lewis. Oh, I already said howdy to you, but I'll say it again. Hey, Aaron. Ben says, I don't disagree about the holiday, but I do think it's an opportunity to meet and get to know neighbors that we might not see and interact by another way. Some I only see today each year. Maybe it's, I'm not going to argue, but maybe it's worth finding other opportunities to see people during the year. So I'll tell a funny little story. I have a 3.5-month-old baby, and he's reaching the stage now where sometimes he just cries because he needs to go to sleep, but he can't put himself to sleep, and his mother can't put him to sleep. So we've got these baby carriers, and I put him on my chest, and I walk around the block a couple times till he passes out. It's really good. So happened after dark the other night, and I'm walking down the street, and behind me I hear somebody squealing their tires and driving like a freaking maniac, and they come pretty close to me. And man, was I mad. I'm trying to put my baby down and just trying to have a quiet. Anyway, it's my neighbor across the street. I never see. I should talk to them. I feel bad. I think it's super important as Christians to know our neighbors, have good relationships with our neighbors. So this is something that convicts me. But man, I was mad at this guy. I thought, should I go over and talk to him? And his wife pulls up behind him, and then they get out of their cars, and I just go, no, I don't need, I can't have a conflict with a baby on my chest. So I go home. And then I'm out walking the baby again yesterday because he's having a midday crisis. And what do you know? My neighbor pulls out of his driveway in his pickup truck, and I'm looking at him, just partly trying to make sure he's the same guy I met a couple of years ago whenever I introduced myself to him. But he sees me. He parks, he stops, and he puts his window down, and he apologized to me. This guy's not even a believer, by the way. He's somebody I should be witnessing to. And he says, man, the other night I did this to you, and my wife said, you just almost ran over the preacher and his child. And he said, I'm just so sorry. I was just having a good time. And man, I admired that. And instantly I go, how many people in the pews could even do that on any given Sunday? How many of them could? It was an unreserved apology that he offered me. And then I was saying, I was trying to remember when I was young, I used to drive that way, and I didn't think anything of it. And he said, no, I'm sorry. I have no excuse. And I just was really touched by that. So sometimes conflict can be a great opportunity for reconciliation and then friendship. So I got his name, and I'm going to try and find an opportunity to run into him and his family here soon. And sometimes it's just being weird. Just showing up at their door with some cookies or some eggs or something. I don't know. We've got chickens that are hopefully about to start laying eggs, so I'm hoping to take a free dozen eggs around. I don't know. So anyway, it's good to find, as Christians, opportunities to interact with people. And maybe Halloween's an okay time to do it, embracing, a worldly. But sometimes, maybe host a block party or just kind of overtly show up and say, hey, I got some extra food. Do you want to come over for dinner or something? I don't know. But it's something worth thinking about. Toy says FIRE stands for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education. Thank you. It was the original name. But now it's Foundation for Individual Rights in Expression. They changed the E. D says, I live in a really small town that is very conservative, both politically and spiritually, but even they get sucked into the commercialization of holy days. Well, yeah, and this is the era we're living in, is even the conservatives have been co-opted. So that's very alienating, and you sound like a crazy person when you say that. Please, Lord, have mercy on thy faithful servant, says D. Marine says, I don't know what they're saying. I have no idea what this person is about, so I'm going to ignore them. Let's look at some news stories today. The ACNA is the Anglican Church in North America. They're the conservative evangelical split off from the Episcopal Church in America, which went left in the exact same way as the United Methodist Church, only 10, 15 years before. And the ACNA has been flourishing, has been doing quite well. They've got a new guy in charge. This is a profile on him. The reason I care about this is the Global Methodist Church and the ACNA obviously are kind of kindred spirits, came out of the same thing or trying to reclaim something good. John Wesley was an Anglican, by the way. Early American Methodist practice was very much rooted in the Anglican tradition, even though we went off in some other directions. There's a lot of my audience that is not at all in favor of going back to Anglican roots. I'm one of the few people. Well, I don't think there's few. I'm one of the people that really thinks that the Anglican tradition has a lot to offer. My wife and I, in our private devotional life, have used the Book of Common Prayer for many years. We're getting further in that direction. We're learning how to do Gregorian chant. We're hopefully going to learn PlainSong after that. There are many rich traditions in the Anglican history that have been left behind that could be reclaimed for our good. And I don't agree that it would exclude the charismatic witness. I think that both can be held in tension, or not even in tension. I think they can be held together. I don't think they're at odds. So this is a profile on their leader. And I think I'd just like to do my small part to get the Global Methodist praying for the ACNA and the ACNA praying for us. And I'm aware that the GMC, my tribe, and the ACNA have already been talking about ways in which they can collaboratively work together for God's glory. So I don't know that would ever mean that both groups combine, but there's definitely talk of an ecumenical relationship for God's glory, which would be fantastic. So with that in mind, let's learn a little bit. It's Archbishop Steve Wood. The title here is Where the ACNA Has Been and Where It's Headed. A conversation with Archbishop Steve Wood. Before he was elected as the third Archbishop of the ACNA, Steve Wood was one of the earliest COVID-19 patients in the United States, placed on a ventilator for 10 days in March of 2020. 2 years earlier, as Bishop of the Carolinas and Rector of St. Andrew's Church in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, Wood watched as his church building was engulfed in a fire. Quote, I wouldn't trade any of those experiences for where I am right now because God has been so extraordinarily gracious to me through every one of them, said Wood. In adversity, he said, he's learned to trust God's faithfulness. And while he readily admits the denomination isn't perfect, he sees the Anglican Church in North America, which formed in 2009 after splitting from the Episcopal Church, as the Anglican Church of Canada and the Anglican Church of Canada as another testament to the graciousness of God. During his term as Archbishop, he hopes that message will be not only reinforced in the pews, but shared widely throughout the continent. On the heels of denominational dust-ups over women's ordination to the priesthood and accountability for the misconduct of clergy, in particular bishops, Wood is beginning his 5-year term as Archbishop, focusing on transparency and compassion as the young denomination continues to mature. A week ahead of his investiture or formal installation in South Carolina on October 30th, Wood spoke to RNS about the ACNA, where it has been and where it's headed. The interview has been edited for length and clarity. So you'll notice one of the things about the Anglican Church in North America, they're an Episcopal structure, which means they have bishops, and they even have archbishops. So in the GMC, in no Methodist body I'm aware of do they have archbishops, but arch just means higher up. You have archangels, ARCH, in Greek just means higher rankings. So archangels, archbishops, they're not going to have a pope, which the Latin roots of pope just mean father, daddy. So father of the church. But archbishop just means there's several bishops and he's at the top. And you'll see that there's already, a lot of overlap. They have the same areas of contention. Uh, I think we don't argue about women's ordination to priesthood or elderhood as much as them, but there are still Methodists who do. And then misconduct of clergy is and bishops was quite an issue in the UMC and is still a concern. It's a concern of mine, by the way. So here's the first question they asked him: as you step into this role, is there a word or theme you hope will guide your work as archbishop? And he said, the ACNA determined some years ago that its principal vision was to reach North America with the transforming love of Jesus Christ. 130 million people in North America don't know Jesus. And that is the compelling motivation in ministry for me, to hold forth the good news of Christ to the continent. I also want to tell good stories. Our Matthew 25 initiative is extraordinary. They're ministering to people on the margins of society. The work we're doing with church planting is spectacular, but it's not being talked about. So for those of us who have a passion for reaching the lost, for aiding the poor, that's a common interest with the ACNA. One might have a stereotype in their head of Anglicans as just doing their little liturgy and not being concerned about the world. The ACNA is very concerned. The author asked him, what's her name, by the way? I didn't acknowledge her. Catherine Post. And this is for Religion News Service, so this is reposted here. She asked, when you look back at the past 15 years, what are some of the things you think the ACNA has done well as a denomination? He says, I find enormous satisfaction looking back over the last 20 years and saying the Lord established us, preserved us, and he's growing us. If you haven't seen it, I interviewed David Roseberry, who was once upon a time the priest of the largest Episcopal church in North America, in our country. And he and his church left the Episcopal Church, and I think they're in the ACNA now. I actually don't remember. I shouldn't speak out of turn. But if you're curious to hear one man's story from his perspective of what happened 20 years ago, and for several years, then just Google on YouTube, search David Roseberry, PlainSpoken. That's extraordinary, coming out of a meltdown of the Anglican world in North America. We're not perfect by a long shot, but at one level, 20 years into this process, we've made it. The other thing the ACNA has done well is brought people together across the spectrum of Anglicanism. You'll have low church Protestants, high church Anglo-Catholics, people in the middle, and the ACNA has really created a place where all these folks find a home. I think the other thing is, a number of church plants that started, they went into a community with a vision to make a long-term commitment to live there and become incarnate in that. And for me, that's just classic Anglicanism. So if you didn't know it, it's a global faith. It's to be found around the world, not just Great Britain, America, but it's growing leaps and bounds in Africa. I'm pretty sure it's in Asia. I don't know as much about that, but he's speaking truth here. All right, the next question was, in the run-up to the June Assembly, near 300 ACNA clergy. Oh, I was going to talk about, within the ACNA, what he just highlighted was they're kind of a big tent. I mean, big tent should give us PTSD because that's what they said in the UMC all the time. And all that meant was they commingled light and darkness, the good and evil all together in a meaningless covenant. What he's talking about here, though, is different cultural traditions in the same theological convictions. So they definitely do have high church Anglo-Catholics, what we would caricature as Anglicans, crypto Catholics. They definitely have some of those, or a lot of those. But they also have low church Protestantism. They have a wide variety of expressions within the ACNA, as you would also find in the Global Methodist Church. In the run-up to the June Assembly, nearly 300 ACNA clergy and a diocese voiced opposition to women's ordination and said disagreements on the subject imperil the denomination. Do you believe ACNA's approach to women's ordination is still up for debate? During your term as Archbishop, do you foresee any changes to ACNA's strategy of allowing dioceses to individually decide how they approach women's ordination? And he says, probably no, as to how we're structured. In the Constitution and the canons, this is our governance structure, and the dioceses have authority to make those decisions. And so, short term, it's not practical to think that the constitutions and canons are going to be changed anytime soon. That being the case, the question for me then becomes, how do we live together? And I prefer a more irenic, that means peaceable, compassionate voice. I'm big on having conversations. I encourage others to listen, not to defend a position, but to hear where the other person's coming from. Do I think it's a threat to the ACNA? No, but I do think it's going to be an ongoing conversation point. And I think how we have the conversation is critical. And I think, if you want to read the rest of the interview, I've got the link to it on the show notes. But I think that's a good note to end on because I'm 100% in agreement. How we have a conversation matters. I think we have to have a conversation, and then we have to have it well. There is no refusal to have the conversation and avoidance or denial. That's not good. And then being petty or vindictive or immature, that's not an option either. We have to be adults about the hard conversations before us. And the women's ordination thing seems like a foregone conclusion in the GMC, but there are plenty of other issues, say the issue of infant baptism, that doesn't seem as foregone a conclusion. And there are a lot of places in the world that would like to join the GMC if the GMC could budge on infant baptism. I'm kind of personally of the mind that we shouldn't, that's a foundational doctrinal principle that shouldn't be questioned. But even so, if my reaction to people bring it up is so defensive and hostile that it just poisons the waters, then the GMC is going to not do very well. So the Archbishop here is saying, we can have this conversation and it doesn't have to do us in, but I'm going to insist that we have the conversation well. And that's what any good leader would do. So Lord, bless the ACNA, bless the new Archbishop, and help them to have good, holy, mature conversations. And if it be your will, then we ask that you would help us to come together with them in the light of the love of your Son, Jesus. We ask these things in his holy name. Amen. I'll look at a couple more comments, and then I will go back to another article. JP says, this article reminds me of something, and it's something I was shocked I had to remind some people of. No one and no church and no group is perfect. If you just keep waiting for the right denomination to join, you will keep waiting and never move. And that's really an important thing to remember. D says, I learned on the live chat during the ACNA service that the new Archbishop is a big fan of praise bands. So yeah, that's a lot of people don't know that the ACNA is very open and welcoming to modern worship. JP said, we are people and we fall short. We have to work together and acknowledge that and find ways to still love each other and bear with each other's burdens. Just being just right is not on the list of the commands for unity or instruction for it. Yeah, so Christ's high priestly prayer was that we would all be one as he and the Father are one. So clearly we're called to unity, and clearly the church is a place of impurity. We're coming out of an impure world as impure people, but even so, the Holy Spirit is a purifying agent, and so we should all be being sanctified collectively and as individuals. We need to protect the purity of the church, insist on the purity of the church, but then we also have to be gracious whenever we don't get instantaneous purity. And our era is particularly prone to divide and splinter. We're not willing to have the hard conversations that need to be had, and then we're not willing to stick it out when things get complicated. So you have people that avoid and deny and then leave, and that's a recipe for the death of the church, and that's what we're seeing. D says, so the ACNA would be a good fit to partner with the GMC, I guess, but I hope the ACNA would help stabilize the GMC. Well, and it could be the case that it would. It's really hard to, with chemistry, the only way to know how things would combine once upon a time was just put them together and see what happens. That might be irresponsible, but I think a lot of times, well, it's like a marriage. You think you know how you're going to be before you get married, but then the two become one flesh, and something new is created, and sometimes it doesn't work out. So you have to make an educated decision on the front end. But a lot of times it's just human groups are so complicated. It's really hard to say what's going to happen. But I mean, it's already the case in the GMC. We're not just taking former UMC churches. I mean, heck, we got churches in Thailand joining up. We got churches in Panama joining up. These are new places with a different heritage altogether. That the nature of things is this is going to change things every time. And so we have to be faithful in the midst of that. We have to trust God in the midst of that. Let's look at another article. Y'all know that I'm a big fan. Maybe that's not the right phrase. I'm very sympathetic to the Israeli cause. I think Zionism was based on a very true and real phenomenon. Jews, for thousands of years, wherever they have gone, have been persecuted, not just by Christians, but by every population. They needed a homeland. They got a homeland. It's been a blessing, not just to them, but to all who desire freedom and security in the Middle East. They've been just an invaluable contributor to world stability in the Middle East. And I know a lot of people see him as the opposite of that. But when you learn about the Sunni and Shia divide in the Middle East and the different um, state powers jockeying for power and the means that you don't realize how much worse things could have been. You only see what is. So, in the midst of all this, you have rising anti Semitism in the West. You have it both on the left and on the right. The Christian nationalist crew, whenever I was talking about Christian nationalism the other day, one person said, hey, it really is a problem that a lot of Christian nationalists, not a ton, but some are openly anti Semitic and they're Holocaust deniers, and that's true. And once again, I just got to say, you got to have the conversation and then figure out who the morons are, who are just not informed, and then who the bad actors are. But you can't, I believe in free speech. I think the only solution for bad speech is better speech. But on the left in particular, in academic and elite circles, you're seeing rising anti-Semitism, unapologetic anti-Semitism. And that's what this article is about. Divest, what is the acronym? Sanction. BDS, boycott, divest, sanction, is the left-leaning movement to bleed Israel dry, take all their money away, and leave them helpless so that they will be genocided in the Middle East. The article is called How Divestment for Palestinian Rights is Gaining Ground. From college campuses to city halls, activists are seeing unprecedented wins in getting institutions to divest from companies complicit in the Gaza genocide. Oh, so this might be leaning from the left. I don't know about the American Friends Service Committee. So if you agree that Israel is genociding people in Gaza, then you think that they need to be bled dry and lose their homeland. So we'll read a few paragraphs of this and see what it has to say. Over the past year, we've witnessed a groundswell of activism for Palestinian rights across the U.S. Students, faith leaders, and community organizers are pushing harder than ever for institutions to divest from the ongoing genocide in Gaza, and many are finally responding. Okay, yeah, this is a left-leaning article. Since 2012, AFSC, that's this organization, American Friends Service Committee, has provided technical and strategic support to divestment campaigns nationwide and beyond. Our Action Center for Corporate Accountability tracks companies complicit in Israeli violations of Palestinian rights. We generate a divestment list, which has become a key resource for activists. This year, we have seen a surge in requests for support and have helped dozens of student groups and activists in their campaigns. Despite what some might think, divestment isn't just about money. It does not immediately harm companies' bottom line. Instead, it sends a powerful political message about what business practices we consider ethical or unethical. Both companies and governments of Israel and the U.S. take seriously the political and reputational impacts of divestment. In many cases, they have gone out of their way to oppose our divestment efforts, including passing legislation. In spite of these challenges, the divestment movement is seeing historic wins. From universities to city halls, institutions across the U.S. have started responding to the pressure of persistent activism. Here we look at some milestones in the movement over the past year. So if you're interested in learning more about all the different moves that the left has made to weaken businesses that uphold Israel and to make their sentiments towards the Palestinian Arab population known, then that link to this article is found in the show notes here. And I'm not going to say don't read anything from the left. In fact, I think a lot of times it's very helpful to read stuff from a different viewpoint so that you can understand people who are different from you and who see things very different. So one of the problems here is that the word genocide just like the word racism. A lot of these words that once had power have been spread out to mean very different things from what they originally meant. So, genocide originally meant trying to erase a people group from the world by death and killing. The Holocaust cost shooting and gassing millions upon millions of people. That once upon a time was the notion of genocide. It got spread out to mean different treatment of any population that's negative. So, any notion that the whole population of Gaza should suffer for a terrorist group that is deeply embedded there is repugnant to people. And so I think most people have this notion that there should be surgical attack on Hezbollah and that Palestinians shouldn't suffer at all, Palestinian Arabs. And I think that just betrays a deep naivety about what's possible in warfare and how it is that terrorist organizations work that are embedded in civilian populations. So I can't help but notice, this is a conversation that's been going on for decades, but especially since last year, there are a lot of people that are in favor of Israel saying, okay, what should they have done when Hezbollah and many Palestinian citizens came across the border and killed and raped and kidnapped thousands of people? And there is no answer to that. The answer is always just not this. And that's not a helpful way, an adult way to engage in conversation. Like, it's not hard to be offended by something or have a problem with something, and it's not helpful. The only helpful thing is to have something else to propose. And so in America, the hypocrisy here is just outstanding because we have a native population that is very much aggrieved and trampled upon even to this day, but we don't have anyone proposing that we do things here akin to like they are pretty clear needs to be done in Israel. Moreover, in a situation where, I mean, Canada could never do it, but where like Mexican cartels came across the border and started killing and raping and kidnapping Americans, do we imagine that we would be any more surgical, any more humane than Israel has been in Gaza? That's silly. The reality is that Israel is doing about the best as any worldly state can in such conditions. The people on the other side literally want to see them chased into the sea. Anytime you hear that chant, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, that's saying we're going to chase all the Jews into the Mediterranean Sea and drown and kill them all. It's a call to genocide. So, this is what they want. Now, does that mean that Israel would be justified in bombing and killing all of them? I don't think so. But they are justified at least in defending themselves and trying to, when you're talking about world geopolitics, remember, these people are not Christians, okay? Christians can be held to a certain standard. This is the thing that the modern left doesn't understand is in modern day nation states, a nation state is not a Christian entity. For all the hysteria around right-wing Christian nationalists, it's left-wing people who want to see Christian values lived out on the state level. They want to see non-retaliation and pure peace-loving beatnikism. They want to see indifference to the foreigner, love of the foreigner, welcoming the foreigner in. They want to see redistributive practices like you see in the church. They want to conflate the church and state, and not just here in America, but abroad. Here's my values as a Christian. Here's how I think this Jewish state across the world should live, even though they're not Christians. It makes no sense. So meanwhile, we do have scriptures about the role of the state being to wield the sword, and not in vain. So I think as we are looking at Israel and trying to figure out how to pray for them, and we should pray for them, we have to acknowledge that even in our midst, there are people who hate Jews. The only reason to stand the strong... How many other places in the world do you think there is a population like Gaza that's really struggling under the hand of state power? It ain't the only place. I would wager there are at least 40 other places, including Uyghurs in China, including Christians in, where, not Azerbaijan, the one right next to it. It's escaping me right now. We just take what we're fed and we feel how we're told to feel. There are a lot of people who hate Jews who are bringing it to the UN, who are bringing it to the modern media apparatus. They're spinning a yarn that a lot of people are uncritically accepting and they can manifest that hatred and that